Joining me is State Attorney General Keith Ellison. Nice to have you back on, Mr. Ellison. I want to start.
Great to be with you.
I want to start with your governor, Tim Walz. Now the running mate of Vice President Kamala Harris. He joined her last night in a Las Vegas rally. Take a listen to some of what Governor Walz had to say.
Donald Trump knows nothing about service. It's pretty hard to provide service to others when you're too busy looking out for only yourself. Again and again and again, Donald Trump made decisions to weaken this country to strengthen his own hand. He mocked our laws. He sowed division and chaos amongst our citizens. And that's to say nothing of his record as president.
What are your impressions of Governor Walz, and what do you think he brings to the ticket with Vice President Harris?
Well, he's very relatable. I mean, the guy you see on that stage is who Tim Walz is. Whether he's wearing a camo hat or wearing his signature, buffalo plaid jacket, he's who he is all the time. So he's authentic and highly relatable. He also does well no matter who he's talking to. You can bring him into North or South Minneapolis where there's a large number or a large percentage of people of color, or you can take him to a rural community or a suburban community. He seems to just get along with everybody, and he has a certain sense of joy, a certain sense of fun, and he delivers a line well. He's pretty funny. And so I think that some people would want to pick one candidate or another because they think they can deliver a state here or there. But I think Tim Walz can help you deliver a lot of states. He can help you deliver the entire Midwest. And I guarantee you, they're going to love Tim Walz in Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, wherever he goes.
Now, one of the Trump campaign's criticism on Governor Walz focuses on his response to the demonstrations after the police killing of George Floyd in 2020. Some Republicans claim Walz didn't move quickly enough to bring in the National Guard, even though Trump himself told the governor he was very happy with his response at the time. You were Attorney General at the time. I'm going to get into that, but what's your assessment of how Governor Walz handled the situation?
Governor Walz moved as quickly as the law would allow. And as the chief law officer of the state, I can tell you that that is true. He moved as quickly as he could, and he had to work with local authorities and work with the communication that they sent to him. But he moved quickly. And as you said, the president said so. Now they want to change a different kind of tune. But at the time, there were no complaints. In fact, there was praise. And I can tell you that the people who committed crimes were very small in number, and they have been criminally prosecuted. But the overwhelming number of people who were protesting peacefully, raising their voices to make sure that there was accountability for Derek Chauvin, of course, he allowed those people to have those protests. But he moved in with the National Guard on time and in a way that would protect people and property in an expeditious way. So that's just another one of the stories that they're going to tell. And I just tell everybody who's willing to listen that Republicans' primary way of campaigning is character assassination. That is what they do. They don't want to talk about their plans to improve the public good. They just try to make up stories about who's a bad person, and that's their whole story.
Yeah, well, I was on the ground, as you know, and did the eulogy for George Floyd.
Oh, I know.
And I saw the peaceful protest absolutely was the overwhelming majority. Friday, talking about police cases, Friday marked 10 years since Michael Brown Jr. was shot by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, which launched protests nationwide. A decade later, Ferguson is still coping with the pain while searching for progress. Now in 2024, we're still seeing the same tragedies unfold. 4 felony murder charges were filed on Tuesday against 4 hotel employees responsible for Devontae Mitchell's death. in Springfield, Illinois. I did that funeral as well. His family says the charges should be upgraded from felony murder to reckless homicide. A decade after Michael Brown's death and 4 years since George Floyd's, where you were the prosecutor that handled that case, it was Governor Walz that I called and others that said that there was no confidence in the DA in Minneapolis and asked that he bring you in, and he did. In fact, you called me and said, I just got a call from the governor, and you had known I had called him. Are you seeing progress in how these cases are being handled?
I'm seeing progress and I'm seeing regress. I'm seeing both. I can tell you that prosecutors do get together and talk about how to make these cases stick. I know I've been in many conversations advising prosecutors across the country on how to build a good case where you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And yet, if you look at the numbers, we're still seeing far too many people die at the hands of the guardians whose job it is to protect them and serve them. So it's kind of so some things are improving, but then other things aren't. And that's why we got to have Kamala Harris as our president and Tim Walz as our vice president. They understand that if you don't, whenever law enforcement is not held accountable, just like everybody else is, then people will not go to law enforcement. They won't trust law enforcement. They won't work with law enforcement. And that makes for a community that is less safe. So we've got, and let me tell you, law enforcement members who want to do the job right don't have a problem with holding people who break their oath being held accountable. So these problems, unfortunately, are because, we don't have enough support from around the country and the states, local authorities, and it would really help to have Kamala Harris in the White House because she knows that we have to have equal justice under the law, and that applies to people who swear an oath to uphold it and everybody else.
In fact, she co-sponsored and co-wrote the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that every Republican in the Senate voted against and helped to block it. I want to correct, I said Devontae Mitchell, but he was in Milwaukee, and the Massey case was in Springfield, Illinois.
Right. Well, may I add, Reverend, that after we did get that conviction against Derek Chauvin, the first call we got was from President Biden and Vice President Harris. We were coming down the elevator. I mean, you were there, know. Right. And she was compassionate. She was supportive, and and the world doesn't know that she made that call. But the truth is, it was important to her and President Biden to let the Floyd family know that the president and the vice president were with them. Yeah. And so because you were there.
But I was there. He talked to Philonise Floyd, the brother, and attorney Ben Crump. Let me say this. The Trump-Vance campaign has been amplifying false claims about Vice President Harris's racial identity, falsely suggesting that Harris had downplayed her Black and South Asian heritage in an attempt to raise questions about her authenticity. You have also been subject to racially charged, bigoted attacks throughout your career, targeted over your identity as being Black and a Muslim. What are your reflections on how Trump and the Republican Party are going after Harris and how she's been defending herself here?
It's just George Wallace tactics all over again. We've been seeing this kind of stuff for a long time. Politicians know they can demagogue race. I mean, you've been around a long time, Rev, so you remember what Lee Atwater told him. Back in the 50s, he would say, use the N-word, use the N-word. In the 60s, people wouldn't go for that, so you had to talk about busing. And then after that, you had to even get more abstract and talk about cutting taxes because everybody knew that blacks would get hurt worse. That's what Lee Atwater said. It's nothing but the same old playbook. And I would submit to everybody listening, Rev, that the reason Trump went to talk to the National Black Journalists was not to talk to the National Black Journalists. He went there to tell off and insult a bunch of Black professionals to their face.
Right.
That's why he was there. He started out talking about how their equipment was messed up, how they made him late. and how rude they were. That is how he started. That is how he ended. And he wanted his MAGA audience to know, hey, I don't mind offending these fancy black folks with their college degrees. I'll insult any blacks or any browns or anybody. And that is what it was about. It was about another audience. That's really what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
What I say to people is just remember, this is an old trick. But, he's not the first one who said America first. That was Charles Lindbergh and them saying that back when they were, he's not the first one to say make America great again. He's not original on anything. What he does is picked up an old book to try to facilitate racial division, and we can't let him do it.
Yeah, that's very true. Many said, why did the black journalists invite him? I said, the real question is, why did he go? He went to do what he did, to play off of them, to say, I'll stand up to black folks. And he did. I must say, thank you for being on. And I always say, I do not believe we would have got the convictions of those that killed George Floyd, even with that videotape, if Keith Ellison hadn't done that case. And I will not.
Thank you, Rev.
I will not put you on the spot tonight, but some will want me to ask you, and I won't ask you, but they wanted me to ask you if Governor Walz becomes the vice president, are you going to run for governor? But I'm not going to ask you that tonight. Thank you for being on, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. But if you do decide to run, announce it on this show.